Good day everyone. We are the group 11 and we will discuss about the chapter 11, the Western Women's Movement. I am Gianni Constantino, the group leader, and I will discuss about when liberation has begun and feminism.
What's what? I am Jimayan Laurente. I'm the second reporter. I'm gonna report about the first wave of feminism.
Sawadika, I am Mary Ann Tapiolo and I will discuss about the second wave of feminism.
Annyeong, I am Nicole Andrea Scott and I will talk about the third wave of feminism and the summation of Western women's movement.
Before we proceed to our proper discussion, let us first have our motivational exercise. This exercise is entitled Guess the Gibberish. The mechanics is simple. You will just have to guess the gibberish provided on the screen. Easy, right? Now, let's start. For the first word, liberation. Again, liberation. Do you know what word it is? Yes, it is liberation. Next word, feminism. Again, feminism. I guess you already know what that is. And yes, it is indeed feminism. The last phrase, Western feminist movement. Again, Western feminist movement. The answer is Western feminist movement. I hope you enjoyed the simple exercise we prepared. These are the keywords or phrases of our whole discussion for today. Now, let us proceed to our proper discussion. Let us have fun learning.
Chapter 11, the Western Women's Movement. So the objective of this lesson is to know where the liberation has begun, fully understand feminism, its definition and concept, and have an understanding on the three waves of feminism in the West. Where does liberation begin? So the origin of women's oppression seems far removed from our live realities. The women's movement is made up of women and men who work and fight to achieve gender equality and to improve the life of women as a social group. As shown in the previous chapter, there's a societal imbalance in the power structures that dictates what men and women have access to based on their biology and gender roles. So this imbalance can be both limiting or liberating. The sectorial situationer on the woman shows that the power imbalance of gender roles is mostly limiting. The women's movement made many advances in recent history, yet its scope and description must be discussed for one to truly grasp the current issues of women and gender studies. This chapter serves as an introduction to the history of women's movement both in the Philippines and abroad. What is feminism? Feminism is a way of looking at the world through a woman's perspective. So the previous chapter explained that a woman's perspective is socially constructed and based on how the society views feminism or womanhood as a whole. The patriarchal nature of society has driven feminism to concern itself with the issues in relation to women oppression with an end goal of liberating women through the gender equality. So the next section will look at women's movement and its brief history in the Western world. Because this movement has been around for more than a century, the chapter will focus on issues that steered women's movement instead of the situation of women at a particular time period. It will then be juxtaposed with the Philippines' own women's movement and the development of women's rights in the local context in the next chapter.
The first wave of feminism generally refers to the 18th century until the first half of the 20th century. The first wave of women's movement is characterized by the women's struggle for equality. This started with the development of liberal political thought by philosophers like Kant, Mill, and Russell, which emphasizes the equal rights of men but not women, which led to women to craft their own philosophy on equality. The French Revolution was a movement that overthrew the Bourbon monarchy. a powerful family that ruled France for over a century. It started for the right of resources like bread. Thousands of women stormed the Paris City Hall. The French Revolution was the triumph for the poor and oppressed, with both women and men fighting for their rights. It shows the unity of the people to oppress the elite. The Citoyennes, Republicanes, and Revolutionaries demanded that women be granted the right to vote and hold civilian and military positions like men. However, the male revolutionaries ignored this cause. It is evident in the Declaration of the Rights of Women and Citizens of 1789, which only focused on women and men's rights. Women still did not have the same rights as men during the French Revolution. Olympia de Gouges, a social reformer and playwright who advocated for all those she saw as underrepresented when the Declaration of the Rights of Men became the preamble of the French Constitution in 1789. Gouges wrote her own version that same year. Olympia de Gouges wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women and of the Female Citizen to expose the failure of the French Revolution to recognize gender equality, which led to her convicting of treason and immediate execution. Friedrich Engels, a collaborator of Karl Marx in writing the Communist Manifesto, provided a plausible reason why women were oppressed. Engels saw the relation between women and goods as the root to women's subjugation. He published The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State in 1884, describes marriage as a process of gaining control of women. This idea of property and inheritance and of marriage as a social contract prevented women from being free to decide on whom to marry. The dominant patriarchal system allowed men to be polygamous, having multiple partners, and women to be monogamous, having relationship with one partner. Women and the anti-slavery movement. The idea that a woman is a property of her husband may explain the strong connection between women's liberalization movement and the anti-slavery movement in the Western world. Whereas women attended forums and seminars on slavery, but were not taken seriously. Two prominent figures of the American women's movement who attended the conventions were moved by this insulting experience. Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Mott and Stanton's involvement in the advocacy against slavery paved the way for them to realize that women too were oppressed by certain social structures and laws. This incited them to liberate themselves as well from their perceived limited social status. Women and the right to vote. The Seneca Fall Convention was the first women's rights convention in New York City in 1848. Stanton enumerated in this declaration various women's issues that eventually led to what would be known as the suffrage movement. It was believed that women need not have place to make rational decisions. Participants in the first wave of the women's movement fought for the right to vote, equal opportunity for the employment and the commerce, and the Whig education. The suffrage movement was the major struggle of women, uniting the Northern American and Western European women's movement during the 19th and 20th century, when upper-class women, householders, and college-educated won the right to vote. They split up the support the given movements. Fundamentally, the first wave of women's struggle was focused on establishing equality with men. It borrowed its ideology from political liberalism that assumes equality of all people regardless of race or gender. Filipino feminist Leslie de la Cruz has this assessment of the first wave feminism. This assessment can give you great understanding about the first wave of feminism.
And now, we will proceed to the second wave of feminism and women's liberation.
The second wave of feminism is usually demarcated from the 1960s to the late 1980s. It was a reaction to women returning their roles as housewives and mothers after the end of the Second World War. Women in the Western world eventually earned the right to vote, while more and more gains were identified for women. There was still a large gap between women's and men's freedoms. Despite women attaining the right to vote, they were still viewed as a second-class citizens. The second wave feminism is more concerned with the idea of womanhood and the issues that came with the social constructions of a woman's roles and therefore her identity. The second wave of feminism was rooted in the movements of liberations in the 1960s and 1970s, and the heightened feminist consciousness. It was influenced by Marxist and postmodernist critiques of society and social structures. World Wars I and II also greatly influenced the second wave of the feminist movement. Women stepped in to help with the war effort. For example, the American propaganda. Rosie the Riveter became an icon of women. It shows a poster image of a woman doing mechanical work, a traditional male job, in a bid to invite women to work in factories as most men were assembled for war. However, when the war ended, men returned to the rules and women were sent back to the domestic sphere. This movement was triggered by the publishing of Betty Friedan's book, The Feminine Mystique, a reowned by feminist text credited for dating to break social conventions regarding the portrayal of women. Friedan highlights the fault of the advertising industry in education system in restricting women to the household and menial tasks that result in the loss of identity and individuality. This book reached women all over the United States of America who were touched by it. Theoretical roots in the second wave of feminism, socialist feminism. Socialist feminism was developed after Marxist feminism to address gaps found in Marxist theories. Unlike the Marxist feminists, socialist feminists believe that women are oppressed in all aspects of their lives, not only in the economic aspect. Socialist feminism draws a different meaning from the Marxist idea of human productivity. One's productive activity is based on the sexual division of labor, which is determined by the society and human nature. Theoretical roots in the second wave of feminism, radical feminism. The civil rights movement in the U.S. inspired another form of feminism that is grounded in structural change. This feminism perspective, known as radical feminism, sought to ensure that women's differences from men were recognized and celebrated. At this point, equality no longer meant sameness but being different and equally capable and valuable. Radical feminism became about a reaction to lack of attention given to sex and sexuality in the women's struggle. Socialist, Marxist, and liberal feminism focus less on the body and more on what the mind or body could do. Radical feminism identifies one's biology as the root cause the oppression of women, which lies in the ideas that one's ability and rule could be reduced to his or her sex. The second wave is significant as it examines not only the need for equality but also the very root of inequality. Is patriarchy as the root of inequality? Many second-wave feminists focus on analyzing the structural roots of inequality in society. This generation of feminists believe that women were forced into roles not because of their natural inclination, but because patriarchal system conditioned them to adopt certain rules. Patriarchy, as the radical feminists described, was maintained through the control of the public sphere by men. Perhaps this belief came about as a result of industrialization and the separation of productive and reproductive work, or the association of women with childcare. Another demarcation of the stage was through legislative measures. The Food and Drug Administration approved an oral contraceptive pill made available in 1961 that was an important step towards letting women develop careers instead of being forced into a family life. The Kennedy administration also set up a Presidential Commission on the Status of Women, which was chaired by former First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. A report released by the Commission of Gender Inequality recommended paid maternity leave, access to education, and good childcare to help women. Other issues include sex-gender rules and relationships in public policies and private relationships, the pornography industry and prostitution, and critics of the traditional roles of women such as motherhood and a woman's place in marriage. The usual reason was essentialist. Women are naturally oriented toward caring for others. Thus, women were prepared for jobs such as teachers, stewardesses, domestic helpers, and nurses, although their superiors were mostly men. Affirmative action aimed to correct this disparity by prioritizing female applicants to jobs or fields that have less women involvement. Today, there are women in all fields, from science and mathematics to law and academics.
Proceed to the third wave of feminism. The 1990s saw the recognition of the different oppressions women face worldwide due to the rise of communism and new global order. This shift in focus from developing countries to developing countries was driven by the effect of globalization and neoliberal economic policies. Third wave feminists emphasized the need for feminist theory and politics that recognizes contradictory experiences and deconstruct categorical thinking. This is characterized by its local, national, and transnational activism in areas such as violence against women, trafficking, body surgery, self-mutilation, and the media. The idea of the universal women's experience was challenged, and there was a call for feminism that embraced the plurality of women's experience. Third wave feminism was born to embrace the plurality of women's experience with voices from post-colony and post-socialist countries. Third wave feminists were raised by second wave feminists. They lived by the principles of gender equality and women's empowerment. They had access to the resources the previous movements had won for them. The feminists of this time had numerous publications on women and gender issues, gained academic niches at universities that include women's studies in their curriculum, and had greater opportunities in terms of economic capabilities and work. This exploration of womanhood and gender came at the expense of the previous endeavors of women activists. Because of this, the feminist movement of yesterday years was critiqued and questioned. Leslie Haywood and Jennifer Drake's third wave agenda sought to challenge feminism and advocate for sisterhood, embracing the differences of women from around the world. Gender, beauty, sexuality, and a concept of feminine and masculine were questioned and challenged by the third wave of feminism, which questioned the ideas of the previous women's movement and challenged the notion of gender as an absolute marker of identity. Gender Struggle, Feminist, and the Subversion of Identity by Judith Butler in 1990 was a pivotal work in the field of identity politics. It highlighted the importance of gender as a social construct and the need for women to be conscious of how they can express their gender identity in a way that truly represented them. A notable woman during the third wave of feminism is Judith Butler. She is an American philosopher and academic whose book entitled Gender Trouble, Feminism and Subversion of Identity brought to light the fluid nature of gender. Here, he challenges notions of rigidity and predetermined nature of gender. She assumed that gender is not an essence whose origin is drawn from one's characteristic and behavior. Instead, the repetition of certain characteristics created the idea of gendered behavior. Humans are socialized to repeat these gendered characteristics. Despite these improvements, women in India still face issues such as unavailability of education, little right to property, domestic violence, and sexual harassment. Indian law and politics have changed, but the issues of women from a variety of backgrounds still remain. The third wave of feminism has been criticized for its radicality and lack of unified goals, calling into question the need for feminism in the 21st century. However, its effect on societal perceptions and expectations from women was crucial in bringing them closer to equality in more spheres than ever before. The wave is said to have ended in 2012 when the social media-centered fourth wave had begun. A brief history of the Western feminist movement is presented to show the various strides that women have made in recent history. Various kinds of feminism with different viewpoints and priorities emerged depending on the needs of women at that time. This movement have created as reactions to historical events or struggles such as the civil rights movement. Despite this rich diversity, all the East and the isms of feminism show that one thing has been the priority of this movement. It is uplifting women such that they can fully participate in society as equal with others and removing structural barriers that prevent them from doing so. While much work has yet to be done, it is important to recognize the heroes of the past for what they have achieved to privilege this generation of a better future.